Hey everyone, thank you again for joining us for our final day of Azure Data Week. Brian Steele is here to give us an introduction to GitHub, so I'm going to let him hop right in and get to it.
Well, great. Welcome, everyone. I am kind of winding up our week here. I hope everyone's enjoyed the sessions, and I've been trying to jump in on a few of them myself, and I think they've been real good. So today we're going to be looking at an introduction to GitHub for Azure data developers. So we're going to kind of try to keep it on the topic of what kind of things can we do with GitHub that are specific for the Azure portal, for the Azure stack, and that would really apply to Azure data developers. Who am I? I'm Brian Steele. I'm a senior BI developer here at Pragmatic Works. I've had about 20 years experience in software development, the last 5 or so of those in Azure, mainly in the healthcare, fintech, and retail spaces. Got all my contact stuff there, my email, my LinkedIn, my Twitter sphere, and I also have my GitHub. Since we're going to be talking about GitHub today, I do have my GitHub link out there. Some of the projects I will be putting up as public repos on GitHub. So if you want to go in there and mess with me and put some stuff in, it's feel free to do so. So our agenda for today is we're gonna start off with a little bit of intro. What is GitHub? Some introductions to that. A little bit on continuous integration and development and deployment. I assume you kind of fit into one of 3 categories if you're in this class. Either you don't know what GitHub is, but you want to learn. You bought the session, you might as well. You know what GitHub is, but you're not sure exactly what to do with it. You know what GitHub is, and you've used some other kind of version control system, maybe Git or CVS or SourceSafe or Subversion, but you want to learn kind of how specifically to use that with Azure. So CI/CD, I mean, I hope you're able to attend Stanislav's session very early for me this morning. Gave a really good theoretical review of what CI/CD is. In this session, we're going to build on that a little bit. We're going to do a little more hands-on work and how those processes can be implemented within the specific Azure data tools, like with Power BI, Function Apps, Azure Data Factory, Databricks, those types of things, and how we can use that model that he explained this morning to really in our data development work. We're then going to jump right in and see how we use GitHub. We're going to talk a little bit kind of in generalizations about cloning and creating new repos, doing forking and branching, committing and syncing, pulling and merging, and then we're going to go in and do a little Visual Studio integration. I saw one of the highly ranked questions on Stanislav's session this morning was about Power BI. How can we use this with Power BI? And really, you can use GitHub with anything. I've used it for strictly documentation projects, book projects, anything you can think of. You can use it as a repo for that, and then we'll kind of go in. That's actually the example I have for the visuals for a quick version of the Visual Studio integration is how you would use that with Power BI. And then finally, we're going to go into how you can use it with some of integrated into some of the Azure data tools. So with Visual Studio, and I have a Azure Logic Apps demo we'll go into there. And then in the Azure portal itself, there's a couple places where it's directly integrated into the graphical tools in the Azure portal. We'll talk about those, and then specifically go into a demo on using it in the Azure Data Factory. So what is DevOps? DevOps can mean a lot of different things to different person. It could be a title of your job. It could be a process. It can be a lot of different things. But really what it breaks down to is it's people, process, and products. This is one of the best kind of definitions I've seen out there. But really it's when you're developing your code, your solution, your data, your documentation, how do you make sure that the changes that you're making don't break your production systems or break what someone else on your team is doing? Continuous integration, continuous delivery, that's normally what we call CI/CD. This is the path that you kind of take with that code that as you're developing it to get it into production. And there's lots of different models. I think Stanislav talked about the Git flow kind of standard staging or development staging production kind of model. Also talked about the trunk model, which is what we use a lot in data development with Power BI and those types of things. We're making the changes and then we're pushing those directly into a production environment. So let's get a little bit of history very quick. Used to be a history teacher a long time ago. So we'll do a very brief history. Git really comes out of the Linux kernel world. Linux kernel was originally using a commercial software tool called BitKeeper as their code repository. So you may ask, why is Linux the king of all open source using a commercial tool? Well, it's exactly what Linus Torvalds said when Linux lost their license to the BitKeeper. He decided instead of trying to find some sort of new commercial tool, that he would create one themselves. And so Git was born. And they really have succeeded. For the millions of people using Git today, it's really the next step of versioning control. It has all the elements of a modern distributed version control system. It allows you to work in both an on-machine environment and with a collaborative model of a central code repo. My next slide didn't go. There we go. Some of the benefits of Git: it has a very small footprint. It was designed in the internet era. It works well, in low bandwidth, high latency networks. It's made to really use limited resources, and that's both, in an on-disk storage kind of capacity and in memory. It's simple, and what do I mean by that? It's really easy to get started. The best analogy that I've really ever heard is it's like cooking. My wife will say I can't even boil water or microwave something, but we can go through enough in this hour, like we are today, to really get started using it. But it's also very powerful. So there are endless ways, resources, tools, etc., out there that you can use to extend and use Git and GitHub within your own projects. So you can go from, you could go from, the hour we're doing today, you could spend years studying Git and all the functions that you could do within it. It's also very composable. And what that means is it's based really off that Unix and Linux roots. It's really made up of a lot of small programs, and these small programs work together to create a suite of tools. These small tools and programs are open to you. So like a recipe in our cooking analogy, you can use these components to make something new for yourself. You can use Batch, Bash, PowerShell, and you can even use Azure DevOps as ways to orchestrate your own project in Git. And then really at its roots, it's a command line tool. And that doesn't mean it doesn't have a UI that we have to use the command line. We're all here for Microsoft courses, and we're all in the Microsoft stack, so I'm pretty sure that we're UI fans at some level. What that really means is that we can use it in about every UI with the same type of functionality. We can use it in Visual Studio, Visual Code. We can also use it in things that aren't MS environments, like Clips if we're working with Databricks, or just about anything else. So we can really use it in a lot of different places because at its root, it's a command line tool. And so kind of the last element is what is Azure DevOps? If you're out there and you're searching GitHub and Azure, you get things like DevOps, CI/CD, Git, GitHub, and Azure DevOps. Well, what Azure DevOps is you may have used something like Visual Studio Team Services or Visual Foundation Services on-prem in the past. And what Azure DevOps tries to do is allow you to use the parts of those tools that you really need. So instead of having to use the entire suite of services, you can pick and choose. Maybe you only want to use Azure Boards for issue tracking, or maybe you want to use pipelines for deployment. You can adopt a CI/CD in the form that really works best for you and your organization. So what does that have to do with GitHub, which is what we're talking about in this session? At this point, just about everything in Azure DevOps is integrated directly with GitHub. So you can use both your existing Microsoft stack and Azure functionality in GitHub and GitHub at the same time. and use the best elements of both to kind of figure out what you want. Today, we're not going to get into Azure DevOps beyond just saying you can integrate it with GitHub, because this is a GitHub session. But I'm going to work on, we'll put together a pragmatic WebEx or something that goes into more detail on using that to kind of refine your CI/CD processes. So kind of some general terms that we'll go into when we get into the demos. A repository. So what's a repository? It's a code source for a specific project. So one of the questions that comes up a lot is, when do I want to create a new repository? And this kind of can vary between different software repository systems. But really with Git, you want to do it for a specific project. So if you want to roll back to a previous version or a previous set of that code, you want to have that project together. There's only one set of Git elements and in each repository, and to go back and forth. Or if you're doing groups of like projects. So often if I'm doing a set of logic apps, or a set of Azure functions, or a database schema, that would all be in the same repository, because those are like type projects together. Then we'll talk about cloning and creating. So that's where you make a local copy of your repository for those code edits that you're making, or when you're creating a new repository, a new shell to create a new project in. And that's going to get you your code base and your Git structures to begin your project with. We'll then kind of briefly touch on fork, which is very important in the kind of the GitHub world. But what that is creating a new repository, including any branches that are within that from an existing repository. You can use that to create new projects based on an existing project you already have. If you want to create a shell from that, you can also use it if you're accessing open source code and you want to make updates to an open source project. You can fork that and then ask to pull that back into the main project. And then we'll talk about branching. So, creating a sub copy of the project within the same repository. And when would you want to do that? That's one of the question. Another question, kind of like what repository? When should we create a new repository? The same idea. When should we do a branch? There's kind of two models for that. So you would do phases of your CI/CD process. So you could do development, staging, production, those kind of standard things, different versions of your software or of your project that you're doing. Or if you're doing a short-lived branch where you're developing a new feature or doing a bug fix or something like that. And we'll kind of go through the examples of setting some of those up. And then we'll look at committing. So that's when you actually adds your changes at the machine level. And then we'll talk about the different levels of that. So you can commit your changes at the machine level repository, and then but this doesn't move your code into that kind of global repo. It only changes it locally. And then we'll talk about pushing, which is then moving those changes up to the global copy of that repository. This only updates the current branch you're in, not any of the other branches that you may have gotten that code from. And then we'll talk about pulling, which this allows you to push for those changes to be pulled into the master repository. And I'm not sure where that naming convention came from. It seems a little counterintuitive to most people, but really what you're doing is you're offering up new work to be pulled into the core of the master project. And in the open source or multi-development project, this really allows you to have a gatekeeper to approve when that code is going to come in to the next level and be ready to be pushed out for the next phase of your CI/CD model. And then we'll talk about syncing. And this is where you kind of do multiple things together. Really, I don't think sync is a specific Git function, but it is in the Microsoft world, in Visual Studio. This performs both a pushing up your updated code, and a pull to update the master code. This works very well especially if you're working on a project where you're the only person and you're just working on the project and you're just using Git as a tool to to do versioning and things like that on your own projects. And then we'll talk about merge. So merge updates that code, updates the code from the pull request that you put out there. So merges that code, that new code that you've created, the new objects you've created, and merges that back in to the master level of the repo. All right, so we're going to get into it here pretty quick, right into, so when we're going to, so we're going to talk a little bit about using GitHub and how it, I was just going to touch on how we use that with Azure DevOps and how that integration works. And then we're going to talk more in depth, and do demo more in depth on using it with Visual Studio and Visual Code integration. And here's some of the links for that, so you can kind of jump into that. And then we'll go into our demo, if I can get the right screens to come up. So for the Azure DevOps, if you just go to Azure DevOps .com, you can get in there and you can start free directly with GitHub. So if you haven't used Azure DevOps before, you can jump right in and create it directly from your GitHub account. You can also, if you already have an Azure DevOps account set up, you can go in and then integrate that directly with GitHub. So you're getting kind of the best of both worlds. You're getting both the GitHub repository and what you can do with that, but you're also getting the functions of the Azure DevOps. Oh, that didn't want to come up. Like I said, we're not going to go into that in depth today. Just want to kind of give you an idea that's something else you can look into. And it has a lot of powerful features, pipeline deployment, repo. It has its own Git repo. If you don't want to use GitHub, you can also use the kind of the same exact things we're talking about, but just within the Azure world itself. And then the other one we can go into is for Visual Studio. Oh, lost my Visual Studio. And you can get this from several different places. You can get it from the Microsoft Marketplace. You can also get it from GitHub by just going to visualstudio.github.com. And it will let you download the extension for Visual Studio. It works in any version after 2015. I'll be using 2019 Community, and you can download that extension, install it. Once you get in, it will ask you, once you get in and start to use it in Visual Studio, it will actually ask you to download the GitHub application and all the elements of that will then be used by that extension. Like I said, it's also available from the Microsoft Marketplace inside of Visual Studio as well. So you can go in and add it from there as well. So when we come in here, you can create a connection. And so when you create a connection, or go to the Manage Connection option in Team Explorer, you will be able to, you can have multiple different types of things. You can have a local Git repository. You can use Azure DevOps, with team services there, or GitHub. So you can sign in. You can actually have multiple accounts set up in there. So I have my account set up, and I can go out from there and clone or create a new project. So I'm going to create a new project for today. I'm going to say create. And then I'm going to call that new project Power BI Reports. So as I was saying, we can really, in GitHub, we can version control any type of software, any type of project that we're working on. It can be documents, it can be data files, it could be anything that you want to keep a version control of and keep track of who's made changes to that and allow other people to access it. Anything that you need those functions, you can do that. I'll call it repo for Power BI Reports. And then this is the local spot where it will go to. I'm going to change that just a little bit. Desktop Power, so I can get to it easier. And then your git ignore, this allows you, and there's a lot of different options here. I think there might even be more on the Git. This might be all the ones from the Git website itself. But you can then say which type of files do you not want to include. Well, by default, it's going to go with Visual Studio because that is the IDE that we're using here. So with the Visual Studio, it will not use things like built files or cache files or database files, things that are generated when you're doing things within Visual Studio, and it will only bring up those source code files that you need for your project. And then the licensing, there's different kinds of licenses you can use. We're going to use none for this. And then whose account is it on? So it's going to be on my dev account. And then you can make it a private repository, which is just for you, or you can leave it open, as I'm going to do in this case, when anyone will be able to see it and access that code in kind of an open source and propose changes that I can then pull into my project later on. I'm going to go ahead and create that. It's going to bring that down. So now in my Solution Explorer, I have this project. So I have my Power BI reports. That's the name of my repo that I'm in, and I can see that down here in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. And then I also have which branch I'm in. So currently I'm in the master branch. And if I had other branches, I could go in and view those here as well. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. So now I have my kind of core branch, my core project that I've created. And so I want to do something with that. I want to put something in there. So I can go to my Solution Explorer over here, and I can add a new file. So I'll just add test.txt file. This is a test text file. And save that in there. And so now in my Solution Explorer, I can see that I have that there. So if I go back to my GitHub, I will see now I have a new repo called Power BI Reports. If I go into that repo, you can see that file isn't there. So I've made that change locally. I've added that new file, but I don't have anything up here in my master branch. So what I need to do there is I need to look at my changes. So if I click on changes, I can see, yes, I'm adding a single file. I want to add that up and put that in my information. And so I can't do anything with that at this point. So if I put in my new information about that change that I made, this is a new file I added. And then I have several different options. So this is what we were talking about I was talking about before. So we have commit. So what commit does, when I do that, that's going to create that file locally. So that doesn't do anything. So if I go back to my global repo, so if I go back over to Git and refresh, I don't have anything there. That didn't change anything in my overall shared repository with all of the files in it. What I need to do for that is I need to commit it. Or in the Visual Studio model, you can also sync, which both commits it and then applies it to the master branch. So this is a test file. Oh, sorry, gotta go back and do a sync. So I will do a sync. And then I have this is the sync that I have. If I had done multiple changes, I would have multiple commits that I could then push all of those up at the same time. So I commit to my local repository, and then I push that up to the current branch or my master branch. In GitHub, I can set that up so that not everyone can do that that's on my project team, so that only certain people can accept those pushes or other things to the master branch, so that there has to be an approval process for my code review. So if I go in here now, refresh, now I have my test text file sitting right there. So what I would want to do as a developer at that point is make this change. So I don't want to make the change directly into my master branch. So let me do one more thing real quick. I'm going to copy some Power BI files. Oh, I thought I saved that on my desktop. Oh, sorry, I thought I was putting somewhere it'd be easy to get to, but I did not do that correctly. So we'll. Okay, so I copied in some Power BI files that I had and put those in there. So you can see those as new files that I'm adding. So I'll go back to my other page, see my changes. I am adding those 3 files in. I'm going to commit those. And then again, so at that point, they're just locally committed. They're not in the master, haven't been brought up to the master branch yet. Then I'm going to go up and I'm going to sync those files up to my master branch. And what that will do is both push those up and also do a pull to pull those into my master branch. So now if I go back into GitHub and refresh, I will see all of the files that I added. You can also see I just did that sync, but it says that those changes were done, 4 minutes ago or 39 seconds ago. Well, that's because it actually keeps the actual time you did those changes, so that you can sequence those correctly as you're making changes to multiple files, so that it knows when that change was actually made and not just when you committed it or pushed it back up to the repo. So now I have that file. I want to make a change to it. So I'm going to open up my test Power BI report. Bring that over here. So I have my very advanced report that I created earlier. I'm going to add a text box here. This is a Power BI text box. And then I'm going to save that. And now you see, so I have checked out that file. Oh, sorry, I forgot a step. Go undo that change. So what I want to do at this time, so let's say, I have this file. I forgot a step here. I have that file, and I want to, I'm a developer, and I want to make a change to that specific Power BI report. So I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to do a branch. So I'm going to create a new branch that is for this specific issue. And so that's where we're talking about a function or a feature branch that's specific for that one item. So I'm going to create a new branch. It's going to be created from the master branch. I'm going to go ahead and check it out. I'm going to call this the add text box branch, because that's what my feature is. And I'm going to create that branch. You can see now it's checking it out. And now instead of the master branch, I have selected the add text box branch. That's the one that I currently have selected. So changes here in this branch aren't going to affect the things that are in my master branch. And it might because I did it in the wrong order, but we will forget about that. So I add this, I'm going to save it. And now that save is in my Power BI master, is in my Power BI reports, but in the add text box branch. And so if I go back to my main homepage in my Team Explorer and go to changes, I can see I've made an update to that file, and I can commit that back up, but it's to my add text box branch and not to my master branch. So I'm going to say added a text box and commit that. So again, that's just saving it locally. That's not going to push it back up. I could have, from this commit all, I could have done all the steps at once, but I'm just kind of going through the steps for you so that you can see them all individually. And then from the sync, we're going to push up that to my add text box branch. I'm going to push that up. And now if I go back into here and refresh, I can see that. And then if I go here, I will see that I have my other branches are now available to me. So here I have this file still has the 5 minutes ago tag on it. But if I go over to my add text box branch, I can see it was updated just a minute ago. And so I've incorporated that change, but only in my branch. So now I've gone through, I've done my testing, I've done my validation on my report. I'm ready to push that up to my production environment, or to my production versions of my reports to be deployed to Power BI. I can go back here. Again, go back to my home. And then what I'm going to do there is I'm going to do a pull request. So a pull request, again, is saying that I have what's in my branch, I want to pull that up into the master branch. I have to create a pull request. Where's my... Okay. And so now if I go back to my master branch, now I'm again in my master branch, not in my branch that I created for that feature. Then look at my pull request. I should see. Oh, did I not get that? It's not pulling. So I saw a question come up in the chat. What's the point if you can't compare the changes? In a Power BI report, yes, that is probably true. If you were doing this with documentation or something else, or in an actual code file, a JSON script, a Bash script, a PowerShell script, any of those types of things, you'd be able to look at that. But as the person just messaged, yes, you can roll back. So you could. It's a good way to keep version control of those files, and you can do comparison within Power BI files because they're really just zip files. In the PBIX files are really just zip files to begin with. So you can go down and do lower level compares, not directly like you can easily with just single files, but you can go down and do that as well. kind of lost. Oh, there it was. Okay. I'm in the wrong. I got off somewhere here. How do you unzip it? You can use any zip tool, actually. If you just change the extension from PBIX to zip, you can use any standard zip tool or even Windows 10 regular functionality to go in and look at the files in there. That's probably an entire different topic. You want to force check. I have messed something up here. But so the idea would be that I messed something up along the way. But for the purposes of this, we will say do that. And so then you can see all of the requests that have been made to pull additional things into your master branch from the other branches. And I was trying to get that to come up here, but I think because I edited that file already, I kind of messed up my process there. But so that allows you to make changes that don't directly affect your master branch, and to then commit or sync those changes up to the master repo when you are ready to test or push those up to the next level of your CI/CD process. And so now if I come back in here and go into my master, and you'll see that file was updated, was merged in a minute ago. And you can go back and look at the history of that. You can look at who did it. If you have multiple developers working on the same thing, you can really go in and see a lot of different things and keep track of that versioning control. Like I said, really, in other things, it does work better to do that with code, but you can also do it with any other type of file as well. Okay. And then, yeah, I can get that to work. Okay. So we'll just go on to the next thing. All right. So the next thing we're going to go into is how do we use GitHub as a data developer in the Azure space. You can use it in several different ways. You can use it file-based, like what we just showed. You can use it to store and house files for version control and documentation purposes to see who's making changes to those as you go on. You can also use that in Visual Studio with the integration that we just talked about. And we can use it with several different types of projects where they have very tight integration with those GitHub systems. So we can use it with SQL Server database projects in Azure and use it as a tool to deploy those. We can use it with function apps, which it's very good at that. Allows you to code in C# directly and then publish those up to your function apps in Azure. You can use it with a term loosely called Azure Resources. I'm not sure why they chose that, but that is really what it's doing, is you're just able to deploy all different types of Azure resources. The one that I've used specifically there is Logic Apps, and we'll actually do a quick demo of that as well. And then you can also use it directly in the Azure portal in some of those UIs that are built directly into the Azure portal. So in Databricks or Data Factory, you have specific integration with Git and Azure DevOps to be able to do that kind of CI/CD processing. And we'll go jump from there and go directly into a demo. So I'm going back to Visual Studio. So we're going to do kind of two demos. First, we'll do one in Visual Studio and kind of how we set that up. And then that will take us into another one, and we'll do that one in Data Factory in the Azure portal. So I'm going to go in and do a new project. And if you do a new project in 2019, I'm not sure what prior versions, but I know in 2019, you can go directly in and you can pick things like Azure Functions, and you can pick those up. So there are a lot of different ones. There are you can add those directly from the Microsoft Marketplace as things you can do directly in your project. You can also do an Azure resource group, which is what we're going to do for our other project. So I'm doing an Azure, we're going to call it this Azure Logic Apps. We're going to create a new solution. And we're going to create that. And then from there, it gives us a specific Azure template of, what kind of Azure resource do you want to create? So you can do a blank template where you put your own. You can do a virtual machine. You can do Linux machine. You can do a web app, all kinds of different types of projects. The one I'm going to do is a logic app. And this is interesting because it has a very nice UI in the portal where you can design these kind of step-by-step based logic apps. But you can bring that down to your local machine, do that development here, and then put that into your source code. And so I have my new project. If I would have done it the other way, I could have added it directly, but we'll add this to source control. And then from here, I can go in. This has a really nice UI where I can go in, just click my logic apps. Oh, didn't do what I wanted. Right click on it, and then it will open it. You can open it up with the app designer. And this gives you access to the exact same app designer that you would have within the portal itself. It's going to ask me to log into my account. Pragmatics, got a lot of accounts. And put it in a resource group. Say the same as so it's going to ask me what resource group I want to put it in. I can create a new one. Also, what location do I want to publish this to? So it's giving you the same kind of prompts that you would have if you were creating this resource in Azure itself. Get that to come up here. Did it go to a different screen? Where's that? Maybe because I got too many accounts. Okay. It's odd. Sorry, I've never had that happen before. Maybe I need to exit out and come back in. Great thing about live demos. Sometimes stuff just doesn't work as you had planned. There we go. And so from here, I get something that looks just like what I would get if I was in the actual Azure portal. So I could create, any kind of logic app that I would want. So I'm going to create a quick one that creates an email for me. So I can send it a webhook request. Office 365 email, and create a new email. Send an email. Log into my pragmatic account. And then I can set this up to receive certain parameters that I want to. I'm not gonna, we're running a little short on time here, so I'm not gonna worry about that. But so I have this project, and now I could do the same thing with my logic apps that I did with that Power BI project. I can use my Team Explorer. I can track the changes for that. I can publish those, branch them, make the same types of changes. But the other thing you can do directly from here is it also gives you the ability to deploy those projects. So you can set up parameter files. You can set up different parameter files for different environments, for your staging environment, or for your development environment, for your production environments. And then you can deploy those directly to, keeps picking that account. I don't want this account. To where you want it to go. And then in this particular case, it gives you a deployment template that you can work on. And these types of files, since all of these are JSON files, we can do the comparison, which someone was talking about earlier in the chat window. Logic app name, PW Azure Data Week. So yeah, while that's deploying, go back to some of the chat questions. Yes, that is probably a whole nother topic of hacking the Power BI report. Maybe we'll have to do a WebEx or Azure every day on that sometime in the future as well. But yeah, you want to be careful doing that. Make sure you have it in some sort of a software repository type system so that you can roll back if you do mess anything up. And yes, Azure Functions are done the same way. In the functions, it's not necessarily the same UI. You're not going to get the exact same UI. You're in an actual code deployment at that point. So you would write code to a function, but you get a lot of the same types of functionality. You can read from event hubs. You could do it as a reoccurrence. You have all of those options when you use that template in Visual Studio, and then you can publish that up, and it publishes actually as a DLL in that case. So as a compiled code option element. But again, you can do all the same functionality, probably even more because you're in a straight code environment at that time. So we'll go back to the example we were doing here about GitHub. Kind of get off on a rabbit hole there, but so what I've done here is, so I've just showed this. This is one of the things you can do. Again, you can do Azure Functions. You can do a lot of those other types of resources as well, and they have great tools for then deploying. And then you can do that CI/CD model where you're doing different branches and tracking through those as well. So we're going to take that. Now we're going to jump over in our 10 minutes left, or try to do a little quicker than that, to the Azure portal. So in the portal, we can integrate directly in with several of the components. Two that I've done myself a lot are the Azure Data Factory, and then also in Databricks. They have direct integration into those. And we'll do an example in Azure Data Factory here. So you can do it. You can set up that integration with GitHub directly from the start. So if you create a new data factory, you can go down here at the bottom and enable Git, and then you can put in your Git repository name, your GitHub, and then your username, and you can create a branch and a new repo, and it will create that repo directly for you in GitHub. But what comes up a lot more often is you already have a data factory that you've developed in the portal, and you want to go in and add that to a repository so that you can use it for change control or to allow other developers to work on that as well. So I'm going to hop into this little one that I created earlier. Very simple pipeline. I got two things here. I'm going to copy some data into the data lake, and then I'm going to send my confirmation email. One of the things we didn't go and look at was if I go back and now look at my logic apps, I have this new logic app that was deployed from Visual Studio directly with that I just did a second ago. So if I go in and look at it here and then view that in the designer, you can see it looks almost exactly like it did in Visual Studio. So I can see that here. And what I'm going to steal this real quick because this is part of my other demo. But you can see you can deploy that directly there. So you could have multiple environments in Azure for your staging, development staging, and production. If you were using a full CI/CD model, and you could then deploy multiple versions of that from Visual Studio. Keep your code in Visual Studio and in GitHub, and then you have all of those capabilities that we touched on before. So go back to our data factory. So when you're in just the regular data factory in this kind of managed term, you go in and you can, if I publish here, if I make a change to this and publish it, that publishes it directly to my production environment. So directly, if I make any changes, I could break my current ETL that I have set up in here and really hurt my systems. So without doing any kind of testing, I wouldn't want to do that. If I go up to where it says data factory and do a drop down, I can set up that code repository. So you have an existing project, you can go out and then attach that to a repository. In this case, it doesn't create it, but you can do it to an existing one that you have out there, or create one in GitHub. And so I type in my GitHub account. Oh, type my name in right. And it will go out and then load up all of my available GitHub repositories that I have out there. So I have one that I created earlier in GitHub, my ADF example. I'm going to select that. You're going to define your collaboration branch. So that's your main branch, your core, normally called master in here. And then your root folder is just going to be the base folder. If you'd had multiple data factories and you had just one large repo that you were doing all your data factories in, you could use that to do that. You can also import your existing data factory resources into that repository, which is what we're going to do. So we're going to take the data sets, the pipelines we've created, and move those in. And then your branch import, are you going to use collaboration and set that up? So if I say apply, failed to create a master branch. Create a new branch. Might have been because I tested this earlier. I need to get a new branch. Please make sure GitHub repository is empty. Of course, wouldn't do this normally, but just because they're not the same type of project, but for our short demo time left, I'll go ahead and do that. And then you can select your working branch. So you could work in the master branch, you could work in another branch that you'd already created. I'm going to go ahead and say the master branch and save that. So let's say I want to make a change to this now. So I don't want to do that in my master branch. I want to create a new branch. So I can go down here from this, say new branch. It's going to default and try to do it by your username in Azure. If you're using a function or feature type model, you would want to do add web link info and save that. Now it's going to create a new branch for me in GitHub and have that in there. So if I go over to my settings, now instead of my example URL, I can paste in my specific URL from my logic app and save that. And so from here, I can save just my locally, like I always can. I can also save here. And what that save will do is it also does a commit back up to your local version as well. If I go in and try to publish it like I normally would, it's going to say publish is only allowed from the collaboration or the master branch in this case. So if I want to go ahead and do that, then I can go in and do a pull request. And when I say pull request here, it will actually take me over to GitHub and then let me create a pull request directly in GitHub. So I'll create a pull request. Let's say create. And now I have a pull request out here and I can track all my changes. If I'm my software reviewer, I can go in, kind of review that, see what I want to do. And then from here, I can then go back to my master branch and then publish. Oh, and then I can accept that pull request here in GitHub and confirm that merge. And then I'm going to merge that change I made in my feature branch up into my master branch. And then now if I come back up here, now I will have something to publish. Yep, there we go. It's going to tell me that I have my one pipeline change, what the edit was, any notes that I took. I'll say okay to that. And then it will allow me to publish that up to the master branch and publish that out to my production system. So I know that was quick. I wanted to at least leave a couple seconds to look at the questions tab, but that is what we're talking about today. How you can use Azure GitHub with the Azure Data Tools and kind of some hands-on practical from there. I'm gonna take a real quick peek at the questions and see if there's anything I can answer real quick. I can find them here. Oh, I got 5 questions. Okay.
There's several more in the chat panel, which I'm sure you've seen too.
Trying to keep up. Yeah, and so I think it'd be if you look at that, you can do kind of either one of those. The question is that you'd like to see merge to master versus trunk for production deployment processes. We will look into that. Does the one old feature branch hang around once you've merged it back into the master? It does for historical reasons, but you can archive those off so that you don't see them all on the list. Does the merge work with the PBX file? Yes, it does, but it's just replacing the entire file, which is really what it's doing in any merge. You're just replacing the file with a new copy of the file. The merge does work with that. How would you handle LFS needed for large PBX files for the UI version integration? I do not know the answer to that, but I'm sure we have some sort of way to track those questions and come back to them. Is there any way to verify what version is published? If the last version in the master is the one that's published. Yes, in GitHub, you can track the entire versioning and it will have each one of the references. That's why it's good to keep good notes about what you're doing on each step as you go along. And the free Azure GitHub desktop. That's a great tool as well. I use that as well. The Azure DevOps they're really two solutions to do the same type of work. Though you can integrate the GitHub desktop, I think there's a lot of very cool features, especially if you're a Microsoft type person and you're used to using their tools. The Azure DevOps is going to be a great choice there. If you're in a greenfield type project where you can pick what you want to compare the two and kind of see which solution works best. But I think if you're doing a lot of work in Azure and all your stuff's in Microsoft, you're going to be great to go with the Azure DevOps. It has pretty much all the same features and in a very kind of GUI format as you go along. And was there anything else? Great session. Automated testing. That yeah, we didn't have time for that in this session, of course, today, but that's something you can definitely do and set up as part of your CI/CD process. And we'll look at doing a session on that sometime in the future. I think that's everything. I think that's all the questions.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you, Brian, for a great presentation. Thank you, everyone, for all the great questions. We are taking a 2-hour break today. We did have someone drop off, but we're looking to replace that with another recorded session. So we will be back here at 2 p.m. Eastern time. Oh, and someone just said, any automated testing for PBIX?
I have never seen that specifically, no.
Okay, good quick answer then. All right.
There could be, but I have never seen that in any of my Power BI deployments. So.
Gotcha. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. Again, thank you, Brian, for a great presentation, and we'll see you guys in a couple hours.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.